And now the chapter that will shock the world! Chapter 8. The Ghost at the Organ. Rereading the message several times, Nancy speculated about the Humphreys and their connection with that Italian walnut tree, deciding that it was best to keep the contents of the message to herself. Nancy went to the River Heights Public Library, hoping to find a book which would throw some light on the Humphreys mentioned in that note. The name sounded vaguely familiar to her, and it had occurred to her that it might belong to one of the very old families of the county. Finally, Nancy found exactly the book that she wanted. Fascinated, she read that a famous old Italian walnut grove along the river once had been known as Humphreys Woods. Even more exciting than that was the information that a duel, fatal to one member of the Humphreys family, had been fought beneath a certain Italian walnut tree. The tree, known since then as Humphreys Walnut, was marked with a plaque. The article went on to say that Blackwood Hall, the family home, was still standing. Built of walnut from the woods surrounding it, the mansion had in its day been one of the showplaces along the river. But now the grounds were weed-grown, the old home vacant, and the family gone. It seems a pity to neglect a fine old place that way, Nancy thought. Why would... The next sentence aroused her curiosity. It is rumored that Jonathan's ghost still inhabits that place. Nancy decided she must investigate Blackwood Hall, although she smiled at the thought of any ghost walking around there. But first she would find Humphreys Walnut. When she returned home, Nancy telephoned Ned, asking if he were free to accompany her, and told him briefly about the letter. I'll pick you up in my car in 5 minutes, Nancy, he promised eagerly. At Nancy's direction, Ned drove as close as he could to the ancient walnut grove by the river. Then they parked the car and started off on foot. They examined each tree for a plaque. It was not until they were deep in the grove that Nancy spied the dull bronze marker with its tragic account of how Jonathan Humphrey had died in a duel while defending his honor beneath the shade of that famous Italian crotch. For fully a minute, neither Nancy nor Ned spoke a word. Then Nancy's voice shook off the spell of that place. I wonder if anyone will come, said Nancy. The note suggested you would receive instructions of some kind, Ned remarked. Perhaps this tree also is used to hold messages. Do you see any sort of a crotch in that trunk, Ned? The youth, noticing a deep pocket in the crotch of the walnut, ran his hand right inside of it. Say, something's crammed in this crotch, he said excitedly. Yes, it's a paper. And it's addressed to Ruby Brown, Nancy cried, looking at it. The message was short. Name the girlfriend who suggested you leave that letter. Wow! Exclaimed Ned. Looks as if you put your foot in it now, Nancy. Nancy read the message again, and then asked Ned to put it back in that crotch. "Come on!" she urged. Nancy led the way back to the car, and they drove to the Italian walnut tree where she had left her first note, signed Ruby Brown in that crotch. Again, Nancy printed out a badly spelled message, asking for instructions on how to find the Humphrey tree. That ought to fool him. Oh. Nancy chuckled as Ned placed the note in the crotch of the tree. He'll think poor Ruby is so stupid. That's exactly what I want that guy to think. Say, why don't you ask the police to guard this place? Well, because I'm afraid I'll scare off the man altogether. I want to trap this mastermind behind the thing, not some errand boy. For the next 2 days, no mail was received by general delivery for Ruby Brown. On the third morning, in response to Nancy's telephone call, she learned that a letter was at the post office. The laundress went to get it. "What does our unknown friend write this time?" asked Bess, who had arrived at the Drew home just ahead of that maid. "Does he tell Ruby how to reach Humphrey's Italian walnut tree?" "He says, ask Lola White." "Lola!" exclaimed Bess. "That poor girl! Then she is involved in that swindler's scheme." "I've suspected it all along," Nancy admitted. "That fellow is clever. He's suspicious that Ruby Brown is just a hoax. But so far, I don't think he connects her with me in any way, and it's my job to keep them from finding out." "Well, what will you do next, Nancy?" asked Bess. "Will you talk to Lola White?" "Not right away," Nancy decided. "Unwittingly, she might carry the information back to the writer of this note." "Then what's the next move?" "Dad says that when you're confused, and I admit that I am, you should sit back and try to rearrange the facts into some kind of an order," Nancy replied. "Dad also thinks that a change of scenery is a good idea when you're in a mental jam." "Well, then where shall we go?" asked Bess. "How would you like to go with me to Blackwood Hall?" asked Nancy. "The book at the library told various stories about this old mansion, which stands within a few miles of River Heights. It's haunted. It's got a secret tunnel, and it's said to house the ghost of one Jonathan Humphrey, who lost his life in a duel. Would you like to explore it with me?" At first, Bess insisted that wild horses could not drag her to this deserted mansion. But later, when she learned that Nancy had persuaded George to accompany her, she weakened in her decision. "I'll go along," she said, "but I'm sure that we're headed for trouble." The trio set off at once, although a summer storm seemed to be brewing. As the girls tramped through the woods along the river, Nancy suddenly stopped short. Below her, the cove where she and Ned had rescued Lola White. The girls were not far from Blackwood Hall now. Could there be any connection between this sinister old place and that strange, hypnotic stair in which they had found Lola that night? Without voicing her thoughts to the others, Nancy plunged on. At last, they came within view of that ancient erection. The three-story mansion, where several generations of Humphreys had lived, looked as Italian as that name of it, forbidding even by daylight. High weeds and grass choked off any paths that might once have led up to the house. The girls circled around the mansion. The wind rattled the shutters, and at intervals it whistled dismally around the corners of the great edifice. An open gate to what had once been a flower garden, a slam, a back and forth, as if it was moved by an unseen hand. Nancy walked right up to that massive front door, expecting to find it securely fastened. To her amazement, as she turned the knob, the door slowly opened on groaning hinges. Tune in next time for part 2.